And we're live with JavaScript Error. Hello, everyone. First, I need to apologize. React Conf had created or had provided a ton of awesome technology and microphones and stuff for me to be able to do this show with really great quality. Unfortunately, there were some technical difficulties with that, and so we're just using the microphone from my computer. And so if it sounds bad, I'm really sorry about that, and I'll try to make sure that's not a problem in the future. So we're live at React Conf right now in the Grand Hyatt in San Francisco, and this is the second day. We've had a ton of awesome talks. We have some more talks this afternoon, and for this show, we're going to have some people on who are speakers who will talk with us for lightning interviews for about 5 minutes apiece, and so it should be fast-paced and interesting and fun. Before we get into the show too much, I want to give a shout out to our sponsors. So first we have Egghead.io, and they are a library of tons of bite-sized videos about JavaScript development and the web platform in general. And Front End Masters is an expert-led workshop with a lot of training courses on JavaScript, functional JavaScript, asynchronous programming, those kinds of things. So check them out for that. Track.js is a monitoring platform, error tracking platform for your applications. So check them out to keep track of errors before your customers notice them. And then Wallaby.js runs your code coverage as you're coding in your editor. It's amazing, very, very cool technology. So I recommend that you check them out for that awesome stuff at wallabyjs.com. And CodeCove is coverage done right. They have a lot of really awesome integration and tools for GitHub and other things. And so check out codecove.io for information about them. Awesome. So let's go ahead and start our interviews. Ben, why don't you come on down? It's good to meet you.
Yeah, you too.
Thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, no problem. Glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks. So your talk was titled "React: What Lies Ahead." Can you give us a basic idea of what your talk was all about?
Yeah, so I just tried to outline the things that we're thinking about for React and how we can help people build great apps. And so that really falls into two pieces: the user experience piece for actually making the apps great, and the developer experience for making it easier to build those apps. And so for both those categories, I outlined a few ideas we have, and these are all ideas for the future, and we haven't written code for most of them, but my hope was that we can share what we're thinking about with the audience and help get people brainstorming on ways that we can solve these problems and hopefully inspire people to fix some of them themselves too.
Cool, cool. Yeah, I think that's kind of a trend of the React community. Is it's very much like this isn't Facebook's code, it is the React community's code, and we're all gathering around to make this community better.
Yes.
Cool.
Yeah, that's absolutely how we do that.
Good, good. So what are some ways that people can get involved in some of the ideas that you proposed?
Well, I mean, honestly, when we look at the community, obviously there are, hundreds, thousands of people using React, and that's really great. But, I look at some of the awesome projects that people have made. People make projects like Redux and React Hot Loader and Material UI and React Router and Enzyme and all of these great projects which do a really great job of just solving entire classes of problems. And then that means that on the React team, we don't have to worry about those as much. And as much as possible when we're building React, we try to make it so that it is possible to build all of this stuff in user space where you don't need to make changes to the React core in order to build these libraries. And there are still a few areas where we're a little bit lacking right there, and I think it's hard to build some of this stuff in user space. But for most of the stuff that I outlined in my talk, it should be possible to just build your own components that do these things. Or one thing I talked about was just making it easier to get started with a new project, and that's absolutely something that we don't have to integrate into the actual React code itself, and React shouldn't have to change to build any of that. So really, I'm just hoping that people can start new projects that solve some of these problems and build on top of what we have with React.
Cool, cool. Well, can you give us an idea of some of the proposals that you made in your talk?
Yeah, so like one of the things I talked about was gesture support. Gestures is one of the things that people often overlook, especially on the mobile web, and is one of the things that often differentiates native apps from web apps and apps that feel really good and native or versus apps that feel webby. And as an example, if you take like the Maps app on your phone, it supports, you can pan the map around, you can pinch to zoom in or out, you can tap on something, you can double tap on something, and the gesture system on iOS is able to distinguish between all of these gestures to figure out what your intent is. And right now on the web, it's a lot harder to build systems like this, and so I'm hopeful that somebody can build a really solid gesture system that makes it easy to just add certain gesture recognizers to your React components. That would probably look like just wrapping some gesture component around your views or something along those lines, and then it can coordinate with the event system and figuring out how to decide which gesture is active, and then call the appropriate code when it decides that one is happening.
Okay, cool. Yeah, it sounds like there are a lot of really good ideas, and I recommend that people check out Ben's talk for more ideas on how you can contribute to the community in general. Ben, is there anything else that you'd like to mention before we wrap up?
No, it's I just love being with the community here. We have like 400 people here and a couple thousand people watching the live stream, and it's just great to see so much excitement about React.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
We'll see you around.
See ya.
All right. So next we have Andres, and I can't pronounce your last name. Suarez.
Yes.
Good to meet you, Andres. And why don't you give like a brief introduction to yourself, who you are, and where?
Yeah. Hi. So I'm on the Nuclei team. I gave a lightning talk yesterday on React Native hacks that Nuclei enables.
Cool. Awesome. So can you talk a little bit more about what Nuclei is?
Yeah.
And what its purpose is in the React community?
So Nuclei is an atom package that provides support for Flow, Hack, React Native, Mercurial. We use it internally for development, and most of it is open source, and you can just install it.
Cool, cool. So what are some of the features that you presented yesterday in your talk?
Yeah, so well, to give some context, our goal with this is so that all development for React Native happens in Nuclei, and you shouldn't have to go to the terminal or go to Xcode. So this first wave of features is to try to bring as much of that stuff in. So you have like the packager right inside of Nuclei. You have the simulator logs. You have the debugger. You have the inspector. So the idea is that you have like one centralized place to do all of your React Native development.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, I think that's really helpful because right now the React Native development workflow involves a lot of different screens and
oh my God, you have to have the terminal open and Xcode over here and your editor, and then the simulator is on the side, and and command tab in between all that. It's just too much.
Yeah, and even if you have like a giant 4K monitor, that's still like you're overloaded with different screens.
No, it's not. So one of the things I actually showed yesterday was with the simulator logs. In addition to just showing you normal output, they also show you errors. So when you red box in React Native, that shows in the simulator logs, which you have inside of Nuclei. So if you happen to have one of the simulator in the background, which that's how I use it, like it's usually not in the same view, I get to see that I have an error right away without having to switch back or move my eyes, because if you not have a giant screen, then I have to hand to the side.
Yeah.
It's like, no, it's just right there in one spot.
Yeah, awesome. So what do you think the future of Nuclei is? Like what are some features that you're looking forward to adding to Nuclei?
So I think there's two fronts on that. One of them, at least for React Native, is the debugger experience. So right now it's there, but I think there's a lot more that we can do. So stay tuned for that. On second is performance. That's kind of been one of those things that Nuclei has not been so great on, and it unfortunately has hurt a option. I mean, Nuclea's been around for almost a year in open source, and it really hasn't gained that much traction because I think of the performance issues. But it's been now 2 months since we like revamped the experience, and it's a lot easier now. So it used to be painful to get it installed on your Atom, but now it's just crazy easy.
Cool. So one of the things about the technology used to develop Atom or an Atom plugin, so it's all written in JavaScript, right?
Yeah. So Atom is part CoffeeScript and a part ES6. Nuclide is like cutting edge ES7.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So if it's a feature, if there's a language feature that Flow supports, we use it. Because our code is 100% flow type.
Okay.
So we use async await, and we use static properties. We use like anything that we can that Flow supports. We use it.
Cool. Do you know what stage Flow supports? Is it stage 2? I think that was the default with Babel.
I think it was a default, but I think async await was actually a lower stage when it was supported.
Oh, okay.
But I love using async await.
Yeah, makes your code a lot easier.
It is. It's so much nicer.
Cool. Well, Andres, is there anything else that you'd like to say before we wrap up?
Yeah, go download Nuclide. Check it out. Nuclide.io, documentation, videos, stuff.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks, Andres.
Yeah, no problem.
We welcome on 2 Erics. So I don't know how to pronounce your last name, so you're going to... Schleidel. Eric Schleidel.
Yes.
And Eric Rosell?
Rosell, yeah.
Rosell.
Nice to meet you.
Good to meet you. And
Nice to meet you.
Thank you very much for coming on. So why don't we get just a quick brief introduction to each one of you, Eric, and then Eric.
Yeah, sure. I'm Eric Rosell. We both work for Microsoft, for a team within Microsoft Developer Experience. Our team in particular kind of takes on strategic engagements with various partners, both inside and outside of the company, to a lot of times get open source tools onto the React Native, or not, sorry, onto the Microsoft platform. So recently we some people on our team have done some work with bringing Parse over to Azure, and likewise.
Also working on like accessibility for Electron. We recently had a Hackfest with the Electron team to actually work on some of the Windows accessibility issues, which contributed directly back to Electron. So that's another example. But as Eric mentioned, some of our partners can vary from small startups to large institutions to also not-for-profits. And our engagement with Facebook and related to React Native kind of originated from the fact that we have partners that have the need to, they have interest in building the next generation mobile application using React Native, and they want to target Windows in addition to iOS and Android. So that basically really spawned our, our basically engagement into that project. Is as Eric and I have been working on the React Native port for Universal Windows Platform over the last 2 months. So for the sole purpose of being able to have UWP support for React Native on all devices actually support UWP. Some of those devices are Windows Desktop, Surface, Windows Phone, Xbox, and then eventually HoloLens. So we're able to have React Native run on those devices for our partners. So our engagement is more directly kind of correlated to our partners' needs and interests.
Okay, cool. So, but the fact that it's correlated to your partners' needs and interests, that is like, you're still gonna all this is gonna be open source, right?
Oh, correct. Yeah, most definitely. Like, one of our goals is to eventually contribute this back to Facebook's master repo. Awesome. So we've already started working with Facebook in terms of doing a technical deep dive on what the implementation we have so far, and gauging the feedback and incorporating that. So
awesome. What's your all perspective on the React Native's approach of abstracting away as much as possible to make it so that we can deploy natively to multiple platforms?
Yeah, sure. I think it's a great tool set for being able to sort of. I think Parash's talk yesterday He covered some of the VS Code extensions and our code push stuff. I think that's an awesome ability to sort of have, shipping agility and continuous integration and things like that. The cross-platform approach is great as well. I think there's a lot of great success stories. Yesterday they were talking about stories where there was 80, 85, 90% of the code shared in JavaScript. That's fantastic.
It's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, the amount of code that
environment too.
Right, and the amount that you get for free for just touch and image and all the other amazing native modules and views that you get from all those different platforms. You get right out of the box. You get that bootstrap immediately available. Like being able to bootstrap an app within 3.5 minutes, the last talk that was mentioned. So, it's just a tip of the iceberg. I mean, there's so much potential that there's there. So, the abstraction is just one of the many benefits of React Native.
Awesome. What are you really excited about with the project that you're currently working on with bringing React Native to the Windows platform?
We're just the sole purpose of the different devices that run on EWP and being able to take React Native beyond just a mobile platform, being able to actually run it on a whole different series of devices like Xbox and desktop. So it opens up a whole different, breadth of possibilities for how far we can take React Native. Also, I work pretty closely on another project called, so basically we're working with another partner of ours. We basically build an app so that it's more tailored for visually impaired people. And it's a 3D spatial audio app where basically it provides navigation and routing, basically verbal navigation and routing for visually impaired. And the phone basically goes in the pocket and it's basically uses stories such as take me to point A to point B or what's around me. So for proximity points of interest near a given user. But it's all audio based. The interface is all audio based. So being able to use React Native for that and being able to actually expand the React Native native module set for that, for peer-to-peer communication or Bluetooth detection for spatial audio would be pretty important. So.
Yeah, I think it's really amazing. Like we think about these upcoming technologies like VR, for example, and we think, oh, like, man, this is going to be so cool for gaming. But we forget about like all the accessibility and like all of the things that this is going to help with people who have disabilities in scenarios like you described. Yeah, very cool. So maybe we can talk for a second about what it's like to develop a target for React Native. Like, how much time do you spend with the native code, and how much time are you spending like working with bindings for React Native to the native code?
So initially for us, our main focus is to build the back end, the core library. So the bridge between native EWP to JavaScript, because JavaScript engine in that case is going to be Chakra. So we're kind of at the very low level of being able to actually connect the two together. Also being able to build the native modules for animation and for touch and gestures and native views such as input box and scroll view and image. So it's kind of like starting from the ground up.
The only thing I would add is just basically, I think one of the cool things for React Native is that the native platform controls layout right now, which I know we're kind of talking about moving towards layout moving up into JavaScript, but we didn't actually have to touch the JS libraries. We didn't have to build a Windows platform into React Native before we started writing the actual native code. We can just sort of piggyback off of what was already there for iOS or Android and sort of get experimenting there. And then as we mature, kind of start incorporating the rest of the JavaScript library.
Very cool. Very cool. So is there anything else about this project or any, maybe this is always the question that you avoid asking, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Release date. Is there any projection on the release date for?
I think right now there's still quite a bit more to go. Just logistics and just more work to go before we're ready for that. So I couldn't even think of
keep an eye out. Follow us on Twitter.
Yeah,
we'll keep everybody updated.
On Twitter.
Awesome.
You'll see pull requests on the React Native repo. So
okay, if somebody wanted to get involved, what would be the best way for them to do that?
I think once we have a pull request that's ready to go, eventually we will. I mean, that's the goal, is to have a pull request back to Facebook. Once it's actually in a stable place, we'll certainly document exactly how contributors can come in and help out. because there's certainly a lot there for a lot that contributors can actually help out with Udemy and React Native. So
cool, awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming.
Yeah.
Appreciate it, and we'll see you around the conference.
Yep.
Thanks. And we have yet another Eric.
Lots of Erics at this conference.
Yeah, and in fact, you're not even our last one for the day.
Oh, really?
So, yeah.
How many Erics do we have in total?
4 in total.
Oh, that's pretty good. I like that name.
Just gonna get rid of this and I'll sit here next to you. So, sorry, how do you pronounce your last name?
Florenzano.
Florenzano. Awesome.
Yep.
Let me just scoot this just.
Are we live here right now?
We are live, yeah. So you've got the
Whoa.
live right there.
Nice.
So, Eric, you like VR.
I do like VR. Could you tell?
So why don't you give us a quick introduction to yourself a little bit, and then we can talk a little bit about VR and JavaScript.
Sure. So I've been doing web development for about 10 years. Started in the Django community. Briefly took a couple years and did an app startup, which I ended up at Twitter from that. Was doing a bunch more web stuff when I found React and did a bunch of blog posts about that. And then sort of burned out a little bit and was trying to figure out how am I gonna get excited about the next decade of this industry, and where is it going, and what's most exciting to me really about programming these days. And I realized that it's actually virtual reality. This is last year. It's just I've been following what's been going on with virtual reality for years. I had the developer kits. I never knew how to sort of use them. I'm a web developer, so I'm not a game developer. And so I undertook a project to sort of build up a little game engine or a virtual reality engine, and use JavaScript to manipulate that engine. And it ended up being a great project both for learning and for exploring and for really diving in and getting an understanding of all this virtual reality stuff.
A couple of things that you said that struck me was that you wanted to learn something new and you wanted to find out something that could keep you excited. And I think that people need to remember that you don't have to just keep doing the same thing you've always been doing.
Yeah.
And look for opportunities to do something different and exciting, something that excites you and keeps you going. In fact, that makes me think Kyle Simpson just recently started writing a game just because he just wanted to have something to keep him going. So I think that's a good pro tip.
And I'd say one thing I was surprised about is how transferable lots of these things were. If you dive into the low levels of creating a game engine, sure, you're going to need different skill sets and you're going to have to do some reading, and I had to do a lot of reading about graphics. But if you're going to just build a game, or if you want to just build an experience, I found that it's actually not that different from writing web app. Instead of writing DOM code and JavaScript manipulation, if you're using Unity or something, you write C#, and it's similarly scripting language, and you can get all your stuff done at a pretty high level. And that's sort of what I was getting at the end there, where I was talking about A-Frame, where A-Frame is actually a pretty cool technology that's built on top of the web stack that lets you get into all this virtual reality stuff using the DOM and using some of the same ideas that I discovered and talked about in my talk. So yeah, I don't know. I think if you haven't checked out A-Frame, I would definitely check out A-Frame and continue to watch what's going on with the web VR scene and the WebGL stuff. There's a lot that's going on there, and it could be that the internet is the real metaverse that we end up getting some days. Just the internet.
Very interesting. So one other thing that you mentioned that I think is I just need to call out is you said that you worked on this small project. This is a pretty big endeavor from what I saw. You basically you found a really old makefile from 6 months or 6 years ago.
6 years ago.
Yeah. So if you haven't watched the talk, you needed to build SpiderMonkey, but there was nothing that you could find to build it except something in SVN that was deleted 6 years ago to actually build it for VR. I just think that's
by the way, better ways to do it than the way I did it. Actually, pro tip: if you want to get a SpiderMonkey build, just build Firefox, and it spits out a static binary of SpiderMonkey you can copy and paste. Found that out later.
Wow, that's good pro tip. Anybody wanting to build SpiderMonkey, there you go. Cool. So, can you talk a little bit about what you see as the future of the web and specifically the VR space? How is that going to change our culture and change the world that we live in today?
Well, I don't know. It's hard to predict things far out in the future, but I think actually in the pretty near term, We're going to see VR used for, obviously games are the big use case. And games are sort of the Trojan, I think of it as a Trojan horse to get into people's homes. But I think beyond that, there's, like I talked about, I think creative activities, things where you're being creative in this virtual space. It's so natural that that's quickly moving into production. So architecture and 3D modeling and things like texturing and all the stuff that this content creation is going to start happening in virtual reality, because you can always craft like the perfect tool to do exactly what you want to do at any given point. That's something you don't get in real life. So it's, in some cases, it can be better than reality because you can sort of use the reality that you can create to your advantage. Beyond that, I think multiplayer experiences, this feeling that you get when you're in a virtual experience and when you're in virtual reality with someone else, is you feel this sense that you're really there with them. And it's hard to describe and it's hard to understand if you're just looking at it on a screen. But there's this real sense of togetherness that you get. People like to say social experiences, but when you think of social, you think of Facebook and Twitter and all these things. I like to think of it as togetherness, because you really get this sense of, like, you and I are sitting here, that if I do something weird, like, I get embarrassed in VR, but online I could say something weird and not feel bad at all.
Yeah. Maybe
So
this should divert trolls then.
No, I've seen plenty of trolling in VR, so we're gonna have to deal with that just as well. Can't ignore all the real world problems that come from these things. But honestly, though, that's what I think creative activities, games, and multiplayer experiences are going to be the first couple of things that really take off. And then going forward, I definitely see co-working, meetings, conferences, things like this. It's going to be a lot easier to do that stuff in virtual reality in a very actually not far term.
Oh, that's cool.
And then beyond that, I think pretty soon, when the form factor of these things are huge, big goggles right now, and they're not going to be that way forever. They're working quickly on these slimmed down form factors that are a lot more like glasses. And those are coming quicker than I think people are expecting. So that will make it a lot more acceptable, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that was one of the challenges that Google Glass had when they were coming around. It's like, is this monstrous thing that kind of made you look a little bit nerdy? But yeah, we'll see what the future holds there. So one other thing that you mentioned in your talk that I thought was a little humorous is avoiding making people sick. So like on the web, we have to think about accessibility. We have to think about a bunch of different things. But now with VR, we have to actually think about whether people are going to get sick using our application. So can you talk a little bit about, like, why is that a problem and how do you overcome that?
So it all has to do with latency. So however long it takes for you move your body, and your brain expects to get the reaction from that movement right away. I mean, in reality, it's zero frames, it's zero delay.
Yeah.
So in virtual reality, we found that the longer that it takes for that sort of movement to be translated to what your senses receive, so like the light that hits your eyes, if it's 150 milliseconds, for example, to move your head, which isn't all that much time, 150 milliseconds, it's pretty quick. Most people will feel sick from that. But as you get that down to 30, 20, 10, 8 milliseconds, you start to get to the point where almost virtually nobody gets sick from that. And the thing that's difficult about that is a lot of times, like, there's difficulties where you might drop a frame here and there. You might drop below. In video games, for example, on complex scenes and complex, if it's a big action scene, sometimes these things drop down to 15, 20 frames per second. And in virtual reality, it's not just like on an app, if you're scrolling and it starts to be a little janky, it's annoying. In virtual reality, if you drop some frames and it starts to you feel sick. So it's just such a more important thing to be able to hit these frame rates. That being said, all these companies are building techniques for sort of interpolating between frames if you happen to drop one or two. So it's not quite as dire as I'm making it sound, but it's just something you need to be thinking about the whole way through building these experiences. It's just the performance and making sure that latency is so low. Because yeah, like I say, it's not annoying, it's nauseating.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a really good thing for the web in general, because we're going to start thinking a lot more about performance for VR, and that will translate to better performance for the web. So I think that will be a good thing for us. So we're about done with our quick interview, but is there anything, like, if somebody wanted to get involved, what should they do to start working on VR with JavaScript?
I'd say if you're familiar with JavaScript, HTML, all that stuff, and you want to just kind of play around and get started, A-Frame is the way to go. A-Frame uses the DOM. It uses some of the techniques that I talked about in my talk to get high performance, very, very good quality VR out of the DOM. If you want to get a little more serious and hit some performance targets and maybe target some of these more mobile devices, I suggest going with Unity. Unity pretty much owns 90% of the VR market right now, according to basically everything I've heard. But Unreal is not sitting still, and Unreal Engine is actually very, very good too. So picking any one of those engines, they have years and years and years of work on making these things great. And they've actually made them very understandable. And even on the blueprint side, you don't even need to write code in text. They've built an entire programming language out of this node-based programming. And I actually think that, if I may make a prediction, that in VR, we're going to very quickly see multi-user collaborative programming using nodes and not using text. And the cool thing about that is you can actually do some really good optimizations if you're expressing your code directly as ASTs.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that that's exciting. ASTs are exciting. We should talk about that later.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks, Eric.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, appreciate you coming on. And now we have Helena. How are you?
How are you?
It's good to see you.
So good to see you.
Helena and I are actually personal friends. Why don't you give us a quick introduction to yourself?
I'm Helena, front-end recruiter at Facebook. I've been at Facebook for about 2.5 years. With a lot of people there. Very excited about recruiting.
Awesome. Yeah. So you're a recruiter. What are you doing at Developer Conference speaking?
It was the hoodies fault.
Yeah.
No, I'm very passionate about technology. I went to JavaScript Conf in Berlin last year. I like to attend these places, and it's not obviously to recruit people, but just to get to know more what's going on and what people are thinking.
Yeah. So what was your talk about at React?
Yeah, so I've talked about the importance of being findable. Now, I know a lot of people, they put statuses on LinkedIn saying, don't contact me, I'm not interested, on GitHub as well. It doesn't really, that wasn't the point of my talk. It was just to be able to be found by other people, just share your ideas. It's really important because I come across people that are nowhere to be found, and they're expecting that we're going to do a lot of magic. And they are working on really interesting projects, but it's really hard to find it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what are some specific things that developers can do to make it easier to be discovered?
So obviously, as I said, technology that everyone is building is just giving us so much opportunity to connect. I was talking to a few people yesterday. Whatever your passion is going to come out somewhere. Viju was discovered, he had a blog post. That's how he came to Facebook. And it doesn't have to be, if you don't want to be in the open source, have a lot of people who are not. But just being connected with the community is really important.
Mm-hmm. So that wasn't all that you talked about, though.
Yes.
So in your talk, you kind of went from the, we need to start the conversation.
Yes.
I need to be able to find you, and then you explained at least Facebook's process. And I've actually discovered personally that Facebook's process is similar in some ways to many companies. So I think that what you talked about was really enlightening for people, even if they don't interview at Facebook specifically. So can you talk about some of the process that you mentioned in your talk?
Yeah, when I was putting together a talk, I was trying to interview some people to see what's important. What should this talk be about? I wanted to be informative, not especially for Facebook, but other technology companies, and not only for the engineers as well. What I wanted, the message that I wanted to give out is that don't be afraid to talk to the recruiter. I know sometimes people don't have really great experiences with recruiters, but it's really completely informative. And if you're just randomly thinking that this company or this recruiter has something to say and offer and share, and they're doing something great in the community, you should definitely connect. And a lot of the times people don't want to move forward because they're not really sure what to expect. Sometimes recruiters are secretive, not intentionally, because we know the process. For us, it's really easy. You finish one step, and then a recruiter says, no, we go to the next step. I'm going to tell you about the step after that when you get there. And people feel like they're kept in the dark. And it's most of the time not intentional from the recruiter side. It's just for us, it's really natural how everything goes. But I found out that a lot of engineers who are interviewing at Facebook, interviewers, don't really know what happens behind the scenes. And we do, and the hiring manager does, and it's really good to shed some light so people are more comfortable moving forward.
Yeah, I think that the interview process is probably one of the most uncomfortable processes that we experience, and putting as much transparency into that process as possible makes things a lot easier for interviewer, and it allows them to put their best foot forward rather than just being nervous about the process, which is really not quite as important as them showing you what they've got.
Yeah, I think it goes both ways. If recruiters are very transparent about the process, then the person who's going into the interview process is going to also be transparent with that recruiter. It does really go both ways, and it has to do with trust. And I shed some light on the whole process, but there's a lot of other things that I do share with engineers when they, when they're just remotely interested. And I have a lot of people that are not interested right now, but they email me when they are, or they want to connect, come to the tech talks. But I think, as I said, it goes both ways. It's really important to, especially for the front end team, because it's so small. And I've been, with that team for 2.5 years. It's really personal. It's a personal connection, and I like, engineers when they go through the process, they feel really confident and comfortable through the process. And I mean, I have coffees with all of them, and if they're watching this, they're probably gonna know there's a lot of them here at the conference. I maintain that relationship because I think it's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. So the there's like some people call it a tech short or a talent shortage right now. Can you give your perspective on what that talent shortage really means, and maybe I know that some people actually do have a hard time finding a job, and so can you talk a little bit about that as well?
Yeah, I think in the industry, a lot of the titles are really not defined. They might mean one thing in one company and another in the other company. I get across a lot of people that say, I'm a front-end engineer, I work a lot with CSS, and that's my primary passion. And that's not when we think at Facebook about front-end engineers, it's not only going to be CSS.
Sure.
So a lot of the times, when you look at the job post, people go automatically to that, but it's really good to connect with a recruiter just to get more insight and do some more research behind what that means for a specific company. Mm-hmm. Because sometimes, when I say JavaScript can be jQuery, it can be Angular, it can be plain JavaScript. It's really defining those terms. I think it's really important, and that would make it much easier for people to see what would be, the best way for them to approach a specific team, and if that's really going to be something that they want to do.
Very good. Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. We just have so many different pieces of our industry that it's easy to specialize in something, and then the terms kind of get mixed up a little bit. So one other thing before we wrap up, I want to ask about how junior developers or entry-level developers can maximize their marketability. Is there anything, any tips that you can give for people just graduating or just getting into software development to help them be marketable and find a good job?
Yeah, be out there. Come to tech talks, come to happy hours, see meetups, see what the community is like. Understand what the job is that you want to go to is. Connect with a recruiter. Keep connecting. It doesn't mean that you need to move forward right now, but I know some other technologies companies might approach it a different way. We at Facebook, especially front end, because it's so new. JavaScript used to be not very a fancy language as it is right now. And now it really is. And from the shortage of people that are actually working in JavaScript, now we have a lot of people that are working in different places in JavaScript. Just being out there really helps. Sometimes I have engineers, it's really hard for me to find junior and senior because I have engineers that go through development bootcamp, and I know a few of my engineers are going to watch this, are going to be nodding, that have, few years of experience, and they're not, by industry standards, not considered senior, but they do really well through the interviews, and they join the company. And it's really, it's depends on where your passion comes out. Mm-hmm. And it really does. It can, you can code for a year, and you can, that talent can come out and can be awesome.
Cool. Well, Helena, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate you coming on the show. And I'll see you around the conference.
Yes, thanks.
Next, we have Isaac. Come on over.
Okay.
Thank you for coming onto the show, Isaac.
For sure. Sorry about my voice. I'm really glad my talk was yesterday. My voice has kind of deteriorated since then.
Are you getting sick?
Yeah, I've been doing a bit of traveling recently, and I think it's kind of catching up to me.
Well, sorry about that.
That's all right.
I'm glad that you gave your talk yesterday, too.
Yeah.
Isaac, why don't you give a quick introduction to yourself, and then we can talk about your talk specifically.
Sure, yeah. So I work at Facebook on UI infrastructure, and the thing that I've been working on for the last really couple of years, 2.5 years, has been building a rich text editor with React. And at this point, we've used it in a bunch of different products across the site. The one that really demonstrates all the features that it's capable of is the Facebook Notes product, which shipped in the fall. And so, trying to, make the most of the solutions that we feel good about Facebook, it made sense to go ahead and open source yesterday.
Yeah, that's super exciting. And what you showed, the demo that you showed at the end was really mind-blowing, the capabilities of this editor. And the fact that the API into it, maybe the implementation is really complex, I imagine so, but the API around it seemed really quite simple. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so it's based on the same principle as like a controlled input. So basically, if you have a React DOM input, you're passing in a value that represents what the state of the text is, and you have an on-change listing. And you can say, okay, what's the value of the target when on-change occurs? And basically, you can maintain control of the input. So we wanted to do something that kind of mirrored that API, but with a content editable in this case. So kind of having a full state snapshot that contained all of the information about the editor at any given point in time, including contents, including cursor, undo, redo stack, and be able to pass that directly to the component and have an on-change listener that would give you whatever the new immutable state snapshot was after some edit has occurred. So trying to mirror that controlled input API. And then on top of that, when making changes, edits, moving cursor, anything like that, making sure that the API would make sense when making changes to the state. So trying to keep things functional, no side effects, that kind of thing.
Sure. So you use content editable. Like, what the heck? Man?
Yeah.
Yeah. So can you talk about some of the challenges with the alternative approaches that you came against that finally made you go, okay, let's try this content editable thing?
Yeah. So the initial approach that we were using for, so this is used in our comment input on feed stories. The initial approach that we used for a long time, actually, the initial approach actually was content editable. Tom Aquino would kind of give me an elbow to remind me of that. It was content editable. This was back in 2009.
Cool. What stopped you from?
It had all kinds of issues because content editable has issues. If you try to just use it natively as is, you run into problems with markup doesn't match up with one browser to the next. You have to kind of sanitize everything, normalize all of it. It's just really hard to try to make that work across all browsers. So they moved over to a different rendering approach, which was just a plain text area with highlighter divs basically positioned behind that plain text.
It's like position absolute kind of thing.
In this case, the way they did it was to have spans with, I think, visible text within the visible text spans with text inside of it. That would be the highlighted text, and that would be positioned behind the plain text. So you can imagine, certainly in a pre-React world, trying to maintain the state between these things.
Yikes.
So lots of problems with that, especially when it came to just positioning things correctly. If you end up even a little bit of a pixel off, it'll you'll have the highlighter that doesn't line up with the text. It's kind of a mess. So another option is to do kind of the Google Docs approach or the Code approach of rendering your own cursor and positioning it. Absolutely, you're trying to position it within the DOM, but then you're dealing with more DOM measurement issues. You have to measure how much, how big the characters are in order to put the cursor in the right place. So that opens up a different set of problems. So we looked at content editable in large part because we got that cursor behavior for free. So it's like, okay, let's see if this works. Let's give this a try. And certainly trying to do a controlled content editable opens up different problems. But it was, every kind of approach with rich text is going to have trade-offs. And this approach, we decided, okay, this is the approach. Yes, there are going to be trade-offs, but we felt good about that direction. In large part because of dealing with that cursor behavior. We also, it was also important to us to be able to handle accessibility is a big thing. The auto-growing aspect, as you type more, the wrapper div just grows with it. You get that for free. I mean, I guess you would get that with rendering everything manually anyway, but so I don't know, weighing trade-offs, it seemed like, okay, let's see if we can do this content editable, controlled content editable, and it worked pretty well for what we were trying to accomplish.
Cool. Yeah. So I was going to ask, how do you feel about the final obviously I wouldn't expect that this is officially done for you. I imagine there's still more stuff, but how do you feel about where Draft is now?
I feel good about it. I think there are always improvements that you can make. That's really one of the reasons why I wanted to get it out beyond Facebook, because it's, I think, easy for us to be kind of myopic about what we're trying to solve. And I think that there's like definitely a broader conversation about what rich text looks like on the web. And I wanted to like contribute to that and be able to like have this be part of the conversation. Like there's no way that what we've just open sourced is the finished product for like this solves all problems for rich text on the web. That's impossible. You know, like certainly like with a project like this that can't be done. But there's like, you know, rich text on the web can move in whatever direction, you know, the community makes it go. So I'm just excited to have something that can kind of contribute to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Really simplify things and make it easier for people to innovate on top of what you built.
I hope so. Yeah. So.
That's very cool. So what do you see as the future of Draft.js?
Well, so the thing that probably excites me the most, I know yesterday my talk was very much about the web and what we did with content editable, but really one of the key things about it, about what we open sourced, is that the model is completely independent of DOM. So you can represent a really complex, rich document without even caring how you're actually rendering it or receiving it. So if somebody wanted to build that Google Docs approach of like moving the cursor manually with that model, sure, you could do that.
Totally do it.
But then like the really, really cool thing I think is going to be having React Native implementations. I think that, you know, I mean, you could do something that doesn't even use React if you want to, but I'm really excited about being able to use this model and integrate it with a React Native solution. Actually, the Facebook Groups app on iOS, when it shipped, it's both React Native, and Spencer Aaron's one of the product engineers on that product, basically forked what I had built for the like a very early version of Draft and built a React Native implementation for it. So I'm super excited about the things that can be done with that. And that's the kind of thing where it's like, because the model is just JavaScript, you can do whatever you want with it. And a React Native implementation would be like, I'm excited to see something come of that.
That's awesome. It's really cool when something that you've built enables something you can do.
Yeah, exactly.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Isaac, thank you for coming on the show.
All right, thanks very much.
And we'll see you around the conference.
All right, take care.
Come on over, Scott. So this is Scott Kyle. Thank you very much for coming in. Why don't you give us a brief introduction to yourself, and then you can talk a little bit about Realm.
Oh, okay. I'm Scott. I've been working for Realm for a little bit now, and I'm a Cocoa JS developer. So I worked at a startup called Inkling before, and at Apple, and then I co-founded the company a few years back. And then more recently, I've been doing some independent Mac development, working for Realm now.
Cool, awesome. Yeah. So tell us about Realm and about your talk.
Okay, so Realm is a database that is like an alternative to SQLite, made to be like embedded in mobile apps. They've had language bindings for Objective-C, Swift, and Java, and you know they got really excited about integrating with React Native, and then so that's kind of where I come in, and my coworker Ari, who got started on this before me, and we just pushed over the finish line and got it out the door yesterday.
Yeah, congratulations.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, you know, there's a lot more to do, but, you know, it's at the point now where, you know, it works on iOS and Android, and people can use it in React Native apps. So.
Awesome. Yeah, I think it's always exciting and kind of nerve-wracking when you work on something really hard for a long time, and then when you finally open source it. So.
Yeah, but, you know, I think we've been getting really positive reception. So that's, you know, makes me feel really good. And yeah, I'm just psyched to, you know, make it better and better. I mean, like it has everything you need to use in an app, but you know, there's lots of API that the other language bindings have that we still got to fill in. So.
Sure. Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about the actual implementation of how it works, the technology, and like how do you account for differences in platforms, those kinds of things?
Yeah, so luckily with React Native, they use JavaScript core on both iOS and Android, at least for the time being. JavaScript core is like the JavaScript engine that's used in WebKit. And so that's something that made it easy for us to write, you know, just basically one language binding to work with JavaScript core in C++. and put that on both iOS and Android. So yeah, we need to access the JavaScript core context in order to expose special methods and functions that you need that native binding to be able to accomplish certain things that you can accomplish without. So
sure. So I'm a little bit curious, and maybe this will demonstrate that I have no idea what I'm talking about. But how do you actually store the data in your database on the device? Is it in like file system, or how's that information stored?
Yeah, so like SQLite has this one file, and all the operations are done on that file. Realm's kind of similar. They create a file, and it's a append-only database, and so they write snapshots to that file. The file is memory mapped, so that means like you can access the file as if it's in memory, and then it garbage collects old snapshots and data that it no longer needs as you append to it, and so that enables it to work really well in very multi-threaded environments, which is not exactly something we needed for the JS binding, but it does really well in lots of threads and asynchronous calls and stuff like that. So
cool, exciting. So what do you see as the future for Realm? What are some things that still need to happen for Realm?
Well, right now we're pretty psyched about getting our JS binding working in Node.
Cool.
And just trying to get more and more developers to be using it and giving us great feedback on how to make it better. It's a really solid database as it is now. One thing that we're really excited about is, like I mentioned, the snapshot feature with Realm internally is we're trying to bubble that up so that you can have snapshots of your data in JavaScript. So it works really well like as immutable data structures with like Redux and stuff like that. So we know that functionality is possible. There's just like a few extra bits that we need to put in there to make it all work together.
Very interesting.
So super psyched about that.
Have your entire database in your Redux store.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Exactly.
Cool. So if somebody wanted to get involved in Realm and help out or learn more, where would you direct them?
Well, their documentation and guides on their website are just super phenomenal. It's at realm.io. But check out the repo. I mean, it has example apps. It has pretty good build instructions, and so there's we really appreciate people checking it out and maybe sending us some PRs for some things to make it better. So
cool. Is there anything else you'd like to talk about, Realm?
No, I mean just psyched to get it out there and on JavaScript. I love JavaScript, and also excited about Node and getting working on Node. So you just npm install Realm, and you can require it into your React Native app, require it in your Node, and it'll all just work exactly the same.
Cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. Exciting. Thanks, Scott.
Yeah. Thank you
Appreciate
very much.
And next we have Jameson Dance. Hello, hello. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So you, sir, still have butterflies in your stomach. You haven't given your talk yet.
Yeah, 2 hours from now.
Yeah, well, that's
Give or
exciting.
take.
Well, why don't you give us
a
a quick intro to yourself, who you are, and then we can talk a little bit about Elm.
Sure. So I'm Jameson Dance. I'm going to talk about Elm, even though I'm in no way affiliated with it. I just am a happy user.
I think most of us are that way with most of the technologies that we talk about.
Yeah, I'm not like on the Elm dime or anything. I don't know. What else did I do? I do a podcast called JavaScript Jabber.
It's a sweet podcast, by the way.
Thank you. And then I do a conference called React Rally in August. It's a community React conference in Salt Lake City. You should all come.
Yeah, there's the invite right
There's
there.
the pitch.
Yeah.
Let me invite you as my guest.
Yeah, it's very cool. I went last year. It's awesome. Maybe we hopefully could get a discount code for for show viewers. So check out the deals page later. That'd be awesome. Cool. So let's talk about Elm and what does Elm have to do with the React conference?
That's a great question. So Elm is a functional programming language that runs in the browser. I would say its relation to React comes mostly from Redux. So Redux is basically Elm translated into JavaScript. They were pretty directly inspired by the way you build applications in Elm. And Redux has all these implicit rules, like your reducers have to be stateless, and kind of some rules about how you structure reducers together and how you manage your actions and stuff. And all that stuff is just built into Elm. Like, you don't have to think about it because the compiler will tell you if you get it wrong, and then you fix it. So that's kind of how I came to Elm. I was using Redux, heard about Elm, and just I liked it better, I guess. I don't know. It's also pretty React-like in that it has kind of the one-way data flow. You structure your app as a tree, and data flows down through it. So it uses the same kind of basic model as React, but slightly different. Yes.
Interesting. Cool. Yeah. So one question that I've had about Elm, and maybe this will like finally get me to give it a much closer look, is with React, they have the context that you can kind of pass around, and it's sort of like this global variable that we're all like, I know I shouldn't be using this, but I'm going to anyway.
But someone smart said it was okay.
Yeah,
so
yeah. So like the router
it.
uses it, and Redux uses it.
Yep.
And it really actually solves the problem with drilling holes from like your top component all the way down. You have to pass data all the way down to all components that need it. And that like it solves the problem in a nice way, even though it's not entirely pure. So how does Elm deal with this kind of a problem?
So in Elm, you're kind of encouraged to make your applications a little bit wider. You don't nest things as deeply. You end up writing a lot of functions that just take in data and return stuff. So you don't have to drill through as many layers because there aren't as many layers in your application. It kind of sidesteps the issue a little bit. There is only one top-level app state, and the only way you can get data into it is by passing it down directly. So their solution is just don't pass it down through as many layers.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. And in your experience working with Elm, is that a good solution for you?
Yeah, I think this applies to all my experience with Elm. Where the first time I try and do something, like, there's no way I can do this. And then I try and do it and ask someone smart, and they're like, here's how you do it. Then I do it, and it's actually nice, and I like it. And so that was my experience with nesting things. Like, I want to nest stuff deeper. You know, like, don't do it. Just do it this other way. That sounds stupid. And then I did it. It's fine. And like, there's no component local state. Anytime you mutate state, it's by sending an action that mutates the global app state. That feels weird. Like, you have some hover state, right? You add an on-mouse enter and on-mouse leave. And it can feel icky because you're so used to the convenience of having local state. But it's nice to have some discipline enforced around it. It's one decision you don't have to make. You do everything the same way, basically. And I think that even though sometimes that adds a little bit of complexity, globally it lowers the complexity because you just do stuff the same way no matter what. No matter if you're clicking a button to like change pages or if you're adding like an on-hover effect or something.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I totally agree. I just started doing Redux, obviously very inspired by Elm, like you said. And I was just going to, control whether somebody's entered an input into something. And I was like, my entire application does not need to know if somebody's entered input in this one little thing. But after doing it, I realized that it's just so much easier to debug things because everything is in one place. I know exactly where to go for any state in my application.
Sure. Yeah, and Elm it even gets a little bit, I'd say it's easier than Redux because you kind of co-locate the different model chunks and the action types in with the components. So you can look at an individual component and you don't really have to care about how it's hooked into the rest of the app. You just know these are like 5 actions this component can do. This is the state of the model, and this is how you update it. And then there's some kind of code that you use to forward those actions down to the right component. But it's pretty self-contained at the individual component level.
Cool. Yeah, I have more questions for you. Maybe I'll ask them later because we're out of time. But thank you for coming. Is there, if somebody wants to get involved in Elm, where do they go?
Oh man, the Slack channel is pretty good. I think it's elmlang.heroku app or something. You can go to elmlang.org. That's the website, and then it'll point to a bunch of other stuff.
Awesome. Cool.
Thanks,
Thank you. I'll see you around. Good luck on your talk.
Thank you.
Now I have Maria. Thank you very much. Appreciate you coming into
Nice to meet you.
our little show here.
Sure.
So, Maria, why don't you give us a quick introduction to yourself, and then we can talk about migrating, or I guess, yeah, it was a migration from iOS to Android.
Exactly. So I'm originally from Germany. I just got my bachelor degrees last week in
Oh,
computer
wow,
science.
congratulations. Wow, that's great.
And in the past 2 years, there have been 3 things that are really important for me. First one is encouraging more women and girls to study computer science, because I personally think that's really important right now.
Yeah, so do we.
Nice. Second thing is I'm really active within the leaning community, which encourages more women to accept leadership positions. And the third thing is that I contribute to open source projects, as I did with my Lean-In app in the past few months with React Native.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm big into open source too. This is great. We're going to be good friends.
Nice.
Cool. So your talk, you talked about how you had an iOS app with React Native, and you wanted to support Android as well. And it was kind of the process of kind of migrating and seeing how much you could share. Can you talk a little bit about that process, about what you talked about?
Sure. So first of all, I started with the app in general. Like, I tried to run the app like it was in iOS and Android, but that didn't work that well, because not all components are the same. For example, in Android you have the toolbar Android, and you don't have that in iOS. And the same way works with iOS, and like iOS components you don't have in Android. So you have to find a workaround, or you have to figure out how you do that. And there are also components that are external libraries, and you don't have them in iOS or Android at the same time. Sometimes you do, but most developers don't have that right now, because they just introduced Android for React Native last year, in October.
Still pretty young.
Yeah, exactly. So I was trying to figure out how to do that and how to wrap that components together. So I wanted to have as much shared code as how I wrote a wrapper for those things.
Mm-hmm. So what did, like, this is kind of the spoiler alert for anybody who hasn't watched the talk, but what was the final number, give or take, on how much you were able to share?
So for my app in general, it was 80% of shared code, which is pretty cool, I think. Because as we heard this morning or yesterday, we don't need 2 teams anymore. You just need one team that knows everything about React Native, and that's it. You don't need iOS and Android teams anymore.
Yeah, I think that's really awesome. I know that there are other frameworks that are able to, like, put your code in a web view, and so then you have 100% code sharing. But it's not native, and I think that it's really impressive that you're able to create a native experience and still share so much of your code.
Exactly.
So what were some of the challenges that you faced, like some of the bigger, more specific challenges that you faced during that migration? You mentioned the toolbar. Or was there anything else that was really difficult for that migration?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is that you have to know where the React Native library is right now, because a lot of things change all the time in Android and in iOS, and your projects change. So you have to know how to deploy, how to run all of these things on which simulator and all of that stuff. So that changes in the last couple of weeks. It changes all the time. Almost every week you have a new change of that. So
wow.
Yeah, you have to keep updated. Yeah.
Yeah, impressive. So after you finish the migration, you're still working to keep things updated.
Exactly. And there are still a few things that are not available on Android. For example, date picking options you have in iOS. It's like a native component, but you don't have it in Android on React Native so far. So I'm still waiting for that, for example. And I'm hoping that will come soon.
What do you do in the meantime for stuff like that? You just don't show that feature?
Yeah, exactly. Or just, I'm trying to find a workaround for that feature, exactly.
I see. Cool. So what are some of the things that were really exciting to you while doing this migration, and what makes you so interested in working with React Native?
I think the most important thing is it's based on JavaScript, and you write mobile applications with JavaScript. I come from a web background, so I've never written a mobile app except in 2011 for Windows Mobile, which is pretty bad, but at least I tried it. Yeah. And that was the first time, and since then I had so much respect with Objective-C, and I did not want to touch that. So I thought, okay, let's try React Native with JavaScript, and it's really awesome. Like, you get started, you understand it right away, and you can find such a great community online. And I think that's the best thing about React Native and React. There's also people here in that community.
Very cool, very cool. Well, is there anything else that you'd like to bring up about this migration, or things that you're working on that you'd like to tell our viewers?
Probably one thing about tech conferences in general. Like when you're meeting a woman in tech at a tech conference, don't ask the woman why she's in tech. Ask her what projects she's done.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's super important in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, what project did you do? We'll chat later.
Yeah.
Very good. Yeah, I think that's something, a really good thing to close on. So thank you for that. And I'll see you around the rest of the comments. Thank you so much for coming on the show. We'll see ya. And that is our show. So thank you for watching. Just a quick shout out to our silver sponsors, Fluent Conf and Auth0. You can check that them out on our website. And next week we're going to be meeting with John David Dalton about JavaScript utilities and Lodash in particular. Really excited about that. John is awesome. And so tune in next week. It'll be at our regular time. And then the week after that, we're actually going to be at Fluent Conf doing another live show. So really appreciate feedback on these live shows that we do so that we can make sure that we're providing the value that you're looking for out of a show at a conference. Like I said, I promise the audio will be better next time. I really apologize about that. If you have suggestions for us, please go to suggest.javascriptair.com and you'll fill out a form, suggestions about the show in general or this specific episode. And then if you have, actually, sorry, that was feedback.javascriptair.com. If you have suggestions for upcoming shows and topics, go to suggest.javascriptair.com. And then our deals page, make sure you check that out, javascriptair.com/deals. And we have a couple of discount codes and stuff on there. I just pushed up another one this morning. And so, yeah, I think that's it. So thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye. And I can't stop the broadcast. Goodbye.